Hello, welcome and a very excellent evening. And today we have another sound card on this channel. But this time it's not a homebrew card as we usually have, but actually one of the best retro DOS sound cards ever, I would say. And one of the earliest actually. And it is the Roland LAPC-I. And yes, this is not LAPC-1 as sometimes it is written, but LAPC-I, I for ISA slot. There were also versions, I think, for some NEC PC, and I think maybe even a microchannel version for the IBM PS2, but I'm not that sure of this. This is already rare, and I think the other versions are even more rare. And this thing is basically similar to a Roland MT-32, which we already had on this channel and which I love and use for all the adventure games. Except it's rather a Roland CM-32 on a card combined with a Roland MPU-401 MIDI interface. So it's one huge card from the mid-80s, and it has an excellent synthesizer chip on board, the LA-32, the same as the MT-32 and some other synthesizers by Roland. And it was first supported in games like King's Quest IV, The Perils of Rosella, and many other Sierra games, and in later years also by companies such as Lucasfilm and a bunch of other companies actually. And just have a look, I mean, this thing is massive. And this is missing its MIDI breakout box and didn't come with a manual or anything. So this is a bare bones board, but it works, and we will have a look at it on the desk in a minute and also listen to what it sounds like. It has two RCA connectors for output or a headphone jack. Both work just fine, and this is a DB15, I think, for attaching the MIDI breakout box, which I am actually missing. Yeah, but the details we will look more closely. I would call this the queen of the sound cards because it's pretty rare, it's a huge thing, and it's supported by many of the classics from the late 80s to the early 90s. And it's still one of the best sounding wavetable-ish sound cards, I would say. And basically the first, more or less, for the PC. So it has a very, very special spot in gaming and DOS PC history for sure. So yeah, it can't play any samples like the Sound Blaster, but it's great for musics. You can upload your own samples, sort of, which is used in a couple of games. But yeah, you can't do speech output with this or anything. But it's a proper MIDI card, and yeah, you can actually use it to do music. You don't need an external sound box or anything, but you can just use it as a MIDI device, even play it with the keyboard if you attach the breakout board. So it's a very, very, very professional card, and it cost quite a lot of money back in the day, and it more or less has kept its value over the years because it gotten so rare and collectible. Especially if you have like the thing in the whole box, you basically pay the full price as you would have back then, which we can't afford obviously, but yeah, this is pretty nice. So let's go over to the desk and have a close inspection. Before looking at the LAPC-I, let's have a look at the Roland MT-32. Which this is. I have a previous video, which I will link to up here, about the device, where I already took a look inside. This here is my second, relatively scratched and bumped up unit. But it still works. It looks a bit nastier from the outside, but the main board is perfectly fine, the display is perfectly fine, so yeah. Anyway, let's just quickly go through the components and compare it to the LAPC-I, because those two are related. The LAPC-I, I think, if I understood correctly, is basically not an MT-32 but a CM-32 on an ISA card together with a Roland MPU-401 interface. The MPU-401 interface was a MIDI interface on an ISA card that you could buy, and you could attach basically any MIDI device to it. And of course, to be able to talk to a synth like the LAPC, you would need such an interface. And this one doesn't have that. That's why we have the PC MIDI card, clone card, which I will also link up here, which is a very nice thing, which is MPU-401 compatible. And it will drive this thing. And the MT-32, the CM-32 and the LAPC-I, as well as a couple of other synths, are roughly structured all the same. And this is what it looks like. We have the microcontroller unit over here. This here is an Intel 8096, if I read this correctly. No, 8095 actually. Microcontroller. It has some attached SRAM, a couple of kilobytes, not sure how many, didn't look that one up. And 2 ROM chips. This is the firmware, I guess. There's also a proprietary gate array from Roland, which is probably programmed to do some, I don't know what, but addressing stuff, I guess. This is this whole block here. Then in the center, this is really the centerpiece, and this is on all the cards and all the synths. This is the actual Roland LA-32 chip. This is the actual synthesizer. That's where the magic happens, and I mean, the gate array can probably be reverse engineered. You can dump the ROMs with no problem. But this here is the magic chip, basically, and to reverse engineer this will be much harder. And this is actually what makes the Roland MT-32 and the LAPC-I sound the way it does. Pretty nice. Up here is another ROM. I think this is the PCM sample ROM. Should be 4 megabits, which is pretty large for the 80s. So this was probably rather expensive. I think the 4000 here lends to the 4 megabit size. So that's that. Then we have a Boss labeled reverb chip, which is, I think, just another gate array, which does digital reverb. And it uses, as it seems, because there's a lot of lines coming out into this direction, 8 kilobyte or 64 kilobit DRAM type chips. So I guess the reverb is using the RAM to, buffer whatever the samples are playing and then doing the reverb via that way. And there's also another ROM down here, which is, I guess, the reverb ROM, according to the service manual. And up here is the second most important chip almost. It's the, what is the manufacturer? Burl Brown, I think. PCM54HP, which is the digital to analog converter, a 16-bit one. And I'm not sure how high it goes. Something around 32 kilohertz or something. So not quite CD quality, but good enough, I think. The MT-32 is actually sometimes called a bit noisy or not that great quality, which is probably due to this whole output stage. I have no idea about this. I think it sounds good enough. Also, one of my favorite parts is the voltage regulator at the side here, which is attached via actually a Molex connector and attached to the case to actually dissipate the heat to the casing, which is, I think, a pretty genius solution, because you get 9 volts in here, and I guess this will probably put it down to 5 volts for the whole PCB. And that's more or less it on this board. CPU, SRAM for the CPU, some gate array for God knows what, the ROM with the firmware, then the actual synthesizer chip, with its PCM samples, reverb chip with DRAM attached, and a ROM for controlling that somehow, I don't know, the digital to analog converter, and some optocouplers for the MIDI and logic chips for gluing it all together. Yeah, so that's the MT-32. Let's have a look at the LAPC-I and see if we notice any similarities. And there are similarities. There's the microcontroller, which we can't really make out, but if I hold it like this, it's actually not an 1895 but an 1898 by Intel. Then we have down here another gate array. I'm not sure what it does. There's also a ROM here, and I think this is also a ROM, probably as well as this one. So the ROMs are all bunched up here. Then we have, what's this again? This is definitely a ROM. So a ton of ROMs, which are slightly different from the ones that we've seen in the MT-32, because as I said, this is supposed to be similar to the CM-32. There is the LA-32 chip, so the synthesizer itself. Attached to it is directly the digital to analog converter. It's the same as in the MT-32 actually. And this is again the reverb chip with its ROM attached. And then there's something that I haven't seen. This Roland branded chip, which also looks like a ROM, I would guess. And there is this Roland branded chip, the HD61J221F. And from what I gathered, this is the actual chip for the MPU 401 interface. So this whole stuff here deals with interfacing with the ISA bus, some bus decoders where you also set the interrupt and I/O port lines, and this is the audio output stage, I guess. I can also see a 558 timer chip, I guess. Could it be? No, it's too small. 5558P it says. Oh, that must be something different. I would have wondered why that is. Because it looks like, over here it looks like a standard game port, but I think it isn't. This is not a game port on there, but I think only the MIDI interface. I think the LAPC wasn't really meant to be a gaming card, but it actually turned out to be thanks to Sierra, at least for the high-end gamers. So yeah, it looks definitely very similar. It uses the same synth chip, slightly different ROMs, but if you had a CM-32, we probably would see exactly the same stuff, I imagine. I figure that the microcontroller is probably upgraded because it's incremented by 3, the model number. I have no idea about these Intel chips actually. But yeah, so the card is in pretty good condition. Some capacitors are a bit, no, they're not straight and anything, but I'm not gonna touch it very much because it works. It's also a little bit dusty. I could give it an IPA bath, but this is such a rare and old card. I fear that I might break something rather than fix it, because it's working, and I think that's the most important thing. So I think we should just try it out with a bunch of games. It will sound more or less exactly like the MT-32. And price-wise, it's because it's rare, it's actually more expensive than the MT-32. I got my MT-32 for very cheap, and for the whole experience you definitely need the PC MIDI card or the MPU 401 for those games that require intelligent mode. And I mean, you can probably emulate that using actually I see some slight damage down here. There seems to be this seems to have been bumped or something. Almost looks like a bit burned. Maybe it was touching something in the PC that it was installed in, but it still works. As I was saying, the PC MIDI interface is necessary and will set you back another $100 or so if you take the clone card. If you take the original, it's even more expensive. Same for the MPU. If you take just a generic sound card, it will work with most games. Some games will have problems, but on a 386 I think you can use soft MPU, which is fine. So you don't necessarily need that. And the MT-32 itself usually will set you back 200 to 300 euros depending on the condition. I got mine for way less. If you have to wait, and if you take something that looks a bit more beaten up, you can get it for as low as half of that, like 100 euros or something. This one here can go for any price, so they rarely come up. I've seen a bunch come up, and one has been given away recently for very, very cheap, cheaper than this one. But I didn't get that. It went to a musician, which is fine. The seller said, I just want to give it a good home, and the musician won that. It was not an auction, but it was like a classified ad. And the seller said, yeah, I want to give it to a musician, which is fine by me. I will just use it for gaming and showing it here on YouTube, of course. And yeah, I want to play some stuff with this, and I want to keep it, of course, in working condition. And if you have some wishes or what we should see this card do, I can put that up on my second channel. If you don't know that yet, I have a channel where I just put up raw footage of game captures and stuff like that, without comments, just for archival purposes, basically. The raw material of some of my videos, basically. Okay, let's put that into the PC and have a listen to a couple of games and enjoy the nice music of the LA32 synth chip. Support for the LAPC-I and the MT-32 was especially good in the Sierra and LucasArts games. So we're gonna listen to a few samples. First up here is, of course, Monkey Island 2, which has a phenomenal soundtrack, especially on the Roland devices. And it is one of the prime examples of adventure games using this sound device. One other famous example, and one of my favorites, is of course Space Quest 3, which is a short game but one with excellent music for sure, and especially on the Roland devices it sounds superb. We can pick almost any 1980s Sierra game and get quite good support for this sound card, and Police Quest 2 is no exception with its Miami Vice-like title music. Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis is another fine example, coming directly after Secret of Monkey Island 2. Both games use the iMuse system, so they have continuous music which blends into each other, and it's especially good on the Roland devices. The Day of the Tentacle was one of the last games by Lucasfilm which supported the Roland devices specifically without going to general MIDI support. It also has general MIDI, but the Roland synthesizers are still supported as a special selection. At least the CM-32 and the CM64, but maybe even the LAPC-I came with some extra software such as this program called Ballade 2, and it also had some patch editors included. I'm not sure if that really came with the LAPC-I because mine came bare, but you can find the software still on the web. Anyway, I think it's pretty interesting to see what a MIDI player looked like in the 1980s. Actually, it looks pretty advanced and it plays very well, but it doesn't read any real MIDI files. This is some kind of weird Roland kind of format maybe. I'm not sure. If you know what that format is that is being used here, please leave a note. And of course, Windows 3.1 supported the card as well, actually out of the box, so you don't need to install any external drivers, which is quite nice. And what would a sound card comparison be without the obligatory Canyon MIDI file? So let's have a listen to that and then conclude this video. So that's it for the Roland LAPC-I, a fantastic DOS synthesizer card, which I can definitely recommend, but few people will ever get to use this because it's so rare and so expensive. But you can use the Mund emulator on SCUMVM or other things like DOSBox and basically have the same sound. So that is, I think, a fair deal. And there are other solutions coming out. There's a Wave Blaster compatible module based on the Raspberry Pi in development that can run the Mund emulator. So you can have basically this thing on a homebrew card, which is nice and much more affordable and much more future-proof probably. And yeah, still I'm very happy that I can play around with this. And I like the card very much, and let's see if I can give it a proper home in my PC, because it's a very long card, so I'm not sure if it makes sense to have it in there all the time, taking up a slot. It's maybe a bit too valuable for that, but it's definitely nice to play around with. So that's it for today. Make sure to leave a comment. I, as a kid, for example, heard about this card all the time, but I didn't know anyone who had something like this because it was way too expensive back in the day. And did you hear about the LAPC-I or the MT-32? What do you think about it? Leave a comment, subscribe if you haven't, and put a thumbs up or thumbs down depending on whether you like the video. Also, as usual, you can support me, and support will be greatly appreciated over on Patreon, on Ko-Fi or on PayPal. Links are down below, and if you can't support via this way, then just watch the next video and leave a comment. That's always very much appreciated. So have a very nice evening and see you soon.